Hello and welcome to this attacking chess video. And today I will go over 3 games that cover attacking the Philidor defense. So the Philidor defense is e4, e5, knight to f3, and d6. So if you're an e4 player, you could come across this. And so what I'll do is I'll just go through, all 3 of these are short games, so I'll go through each game and see if you can guess the moves, especially with the meter here showing who's winning or losing. When there's a turning point, we can see if you can guess what the best move is, and then I'll go back over the game again real quick with analysis. So continuing on, we have d4 by white. So if we see white has just a slight edge here, and then continuing with knight to d7, so the game bumps up a little bit more in white's favor. And now bishop to c4. So white has already developed his knight, his bishop. He's controlling the center pretty good, and he's ready to castle. So the game continues with knight to f6, but now we see the game is jumping even further in white's direction here. So almost +1 for white after this move. So how do you think white should continue? What would you do in this position to try and go for an advantage? So take a look at this. Pause at any time if you want to think longer. But let's see what happened here. So, maybe a beginner might just think, oh, I'm going to go ahead and castle. But in the game, we had capture, and then the knight captured, and now the game continued with a knight capture here. So after recapture to keep the material even, it's white's turn here. And what does white do? White captures the pawn here, checking the king. And it's plus 0.84 here in white's favor. And the game continued with capture. And it looks like the queen has been lost here. But there's a little tricky tactic. See if you can figure out what it is. So pause the video if you need to. If not, let's take a look at it. So bishop to b4 check. Now the king is under attack, but the queen is also under attack here. So queen retreat, that way if you were going to lose that queen anyway, you might as well retreat back. And now you can grab the bishop and develop the knight here. So this is as far as I'll go. White went on to win this game. The pawn is protected. White is up by a pawn. Black also has this isolated pawn here. This pawn can be protected by an f3 move, just fortifying this pawn, and the e5 pawn will be a target. All right, so now if we go back and look at the analysis here from the beginning, see if there's anything that we want to take a deeper look at. So e4, e5, knight to f3, d6, the Philidor. So the computer says knight to c3, bishop to c4, or d4 are all about even. So d4 is played, which opens up the other bishop, helps control the center. The best moves for black are either to capture in the center or play knight to f6, a counterattack on this e4 pawn. But we had this knight to d7 move. So, if you see an out of the ordinary move in a chess opening, one that you're familiar with, that you play a lot, and then your opponent does something that's a little bit off, take a deeper look. You might be able to find a way to take advantage of their not so good move. So here, bishop to c4 is played. Now, computer recommends immediately capturing here, and then knight recaptures. But bishop to c4, is also a good move. It aims at this weak f pawn, which can also be a target in these e4, e5 games, and you're ready to castle quickly as well. So the knight develops, and what should have been played here? Instead, e captures on d4, and then looks like a queen capture would be good here, bringing another piece into the center. But in the game, we had this knight developing, and then this is where black ran into problems. Capture, 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 and then the best thing to do, according to this analysis, is the computer says it's best to just go ahead and capture with check here. Now, the other option is just king up to e7. In the game, we captured this bishop, and then we saw that little tactic to keep the game kind of even. Black ends up a pawn behind either way, I believe. So the other option is this. King up to e7, but then you just go ahead and capture. King takes, and this way the bishop pair is maintained by white. It looks like you just play f3. That protects your pawn, and now we have bishop to b4 or bishop to c5. But anyway, white maintains his bishop pair, and white's ahead by a pawn. All right, well, let's turn these lines off, take a look at the second game of these three games. So game number 2, let's see, let me hide the moves here for the first run through. That way we play through this twice each time. It'll help you remember this a little bit better. So e4, e5, knight to f3, d6, the Philidor defense. All right, so we're just pushing in the middle, and opponent responds again with this knight move, which is probably not the greatest. You block in your bishop. You are protecting this pawn, but maybe it's better to play knight to f6 and counterattack here. So bishop develops, and then we have bishop developing here likewise. But look at this. The game has jumped up to 0.95 in white's favor. So what do you play here to try and gain the advantage? So take a look at it and see if you can figure out how white should press forward. All right, well, pause if you need more time. If not, let's take a look. So capture. So black, has to respond, capturing with the knight here. So then you just continue capturing. And now, because if we go back here, we can't use that same trick of capturing here because the queen is protected by the bishop. So we have this move. Queen attacking the f pawn and the e pawn here. So how does the game continue? We have g6. Queen captures the central pawn, and then the knight blocks this attack on the rook. But now we have bishop to h6 here, preventing white from being able to castle. There's also a threat of, I don't know, maybe attacking the rook here. But anyway, black is left stuck in the center, and white is also up a pawn. White is ready to castle to safety, just bring his knight up. So, white has the advantage here by what? +1. So let's turn on the analysis and see if there's anything that we can dig deeper and look at in this opening. All right, back to the beginning. So we had e4, e5, knight to f3, d6, the Philidor defense, and d4. Now, what does the computer recommend here? It looks like this is pretty funny. It's actually recommending h3 to prevent a pin of this knight on the queen here. Now it's saying that's best, but I don't know about that. So d4 is played, and here it looks like black's best move is just to go ahead and capture. But they did not play that. They just play this, and now the game jumps in white's favor. It looks like d takes e5 immediately is not a bad move, and bishop to c4. So we go with bishop to c4, and now let's see. Once again, e takes d4 is recommended. But in this video, I'm just looking at some moves that could happen if your opponent is not as familiar with the opening and they make a mistake, and then how you may be able to capitalize on their mistakes. So developing here, and the game jumps up in white's favor. So a mistake here. Now, why is this a mistake? Well, it allows capture. Instead of the knight capturing, what would happen if the pawn captures? Well, now you have this queen to d5 move threatening a mate here, and how do you stop that? Computer recommends bishop to b4, but then you can play c3, attacking that bishop, and get ready to pick that bishop off, because you still have this threat of mate here. And if knight to h6 is played, well, then you could just capture that knight with your bishop, and if the pawn recaptures, well, then you deliver mate. So black would probably have to castle, and you would just come out a piece ahead. All right, but back to the game. Knight takes e5, knight captures, pawn captures, and queen up to h5 is what we looked at. And so it looks like g6, that was the best response, but then white just grabs the pawn, threatens the rook, and then knight to f6 takes care of the attack on the rook. And now in the game, bishop to h6 was played, which prevents the king from castling. But the computer also recommends knight to c3. But this prevents castling. And it looks like queen to d6 is the best move, and then queens could be exchanged. Something like that. But then you'd probably end up with an isolated queen pawn here, which could be a target for later. All right, let's hide the lines and go back to, go forward to our final game here. All right, once again, this final Philidor game, and this one is more interesting than the first two, so check this one out. We have e4, e5, knight to f3, d6, the Philidor. Once again, d4, and this knight moving here to help cover this pawn. So now bishop develops once again. White's ready to castle. And finally, we have this capture here. So that's a little different. And then knight captures. And then this developing move. And look at the level here. It has just jumped up to almost +3 in white's favor. So white is pretty much winning after that bishop move. So take a look at that. I mean, the move, it doesn't seem to be too terrible, but it is. So what should they have played? Well, we'll take a look at that in the analysis. But first, let's take a look at this and see if you can guess here. how does white continue forward? What should white do here in this position? Take a look at it, see if you can figure it out. Pause the video if you need to think longer. And if not, let's take a look at this. All right, so what does white do? Sacrifice the bishop. So now the king, what does the king do? Capture. And then we continue with a really crazy move here. So see if you can guess what the next move is here. Check this out. All right, so pause the video if you want to think about this longer. But white does a pretty amazing move here. Knight to e6. Now, you have to look at this. If the king captures, the queen comes up here with check, and the king can't retreat back. The only place the king can go is here to f6, and then there would be a mate with queen to f5. So the king does not capture that knight, but the queen was under attack. So if the queen moves, now we have knight forking the queen and the rook. And the queen moves again, but now we just continue attacking. So queen attacks, block, attack, attack with the bishop. King tries to run away, but the final move here, this fork. So getting the queen anyway here. All right, so let's take a look at this again with the analysis and see what we can find if we dig a little bit deeper. All right, so e4, e5, knight to f3, d6, the Philidor. So once again, we're playing d4 to just get both pawns in the center. Now our bishops are free to develop, and we're putting pressure on this e5 pawn. So, this is why knight to d7 is played, to help cover this pawn that's being attacked by pawn and knight. So bishop develops. Now white is ready to castle, but white is targeting this weak f pawn. And if the knight jumps forward, there could be a threat here with the bishop and the knight targeting this f pawn. So the best thing to do here is for black to capture the d pawn. But after this capture, we have queen capturing or just castling recommended. Probably queen capturing would be better. But the knight captured in this position. And so now we have bishop to e7, and that was the mistake move. What would have been better here in this position? Looks like computer recommends either developing the knight to f6 or g6, maybe fianchettoing and firing your bishop down this open diagonal. But the bishop move was the mistake, and the game jumps to almost +3. And so here, the one move that keeps the advantage with white is sacrificing the bishop. So you have to be on the lookout for these attacking moves because if it's not played, the advantage could possibly dissipate. So capture, king captures, and now let's see if there's a better move. It looks like that's the best move, is to just go ahead and capture. Otherwise you're just down a pawn. So capture, knight to e6. So look at this. You might think, well, what about queen to h5 check? But that's just not as good. So queen to h5 just doesn't quite work. But black has to be very careful. You could get lucky and end up with a good attack. But if they play g6, well then black is just ahead. If you have king to f8 or even f6, well then it would be a mate. So g6 has to be played, and it looks like, oh well, can I still trap the queen by going here? And then what? King has to be careful and play e8, because if f8 is played, well then you can fork the king and the queen. The same with king to g7. If you play king to f6, well then the bishop will check the king, and so king up to e8 keeps black in the lead, because now what? If you try and trap the queen, well then there's a counterattack with knight to b6 on your queen. So, if you capture, they'll capture your queen. So, something like this. If you capture, well then of course they're going to capture your queen. Then, what do you do next? That knight is kind of just trapped in here. You could maybe go after this pawn, but it looks like the best move is just to capture, and then bishop captures, something like that. But at this point, especially after this capture, black is just ahead by +2 worth of material. So in the game, we had e6, queen moved. Is that the best move? They recommend knight at g to f6. But anyway, at this point, white is just winning. So what did they play in the game? They tried to move their queen out of this attack. The computer actually recommends just letting your queen be captured here. But most people are probably going to move their queen so it's not captured. And then you can attack the queen again. What are the other possibilities? Can the queen go here? Well, that would lead to a mate in 8, if you could find that, starting with queen to d5, but I'm not going to go into that. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed these 3 little miniature games here, which featured some attacks on the Philidor defense. So just remember, if your opponent makes an unusual looking move, if you have time, take a deeper look at it and try and figure out if there's a way to take advantage of a strange move that your opponent makes, because it could be a small mistake or it could be a big mistake that costs them the game. So, just remember that. All right. Well, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for those that haven't already, and feel free to leave comments with anything you want to talk about. Leave it in there, and I will do my best to respond to everybody. So thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.